5 deaths in the ring. That is the thing. And that's the take they went with for the opening line of Dark Match, a Shudder original written and directed by Lowell Dean, who's done films like Wolf Cop. Check out his IMDb page for the full list of his work. And this takes place in a remote area in Canada, in the environs of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, not Calgary. Dramatic pause. Alberta, Canada, if I can be serious for a minute. And speaking of being serious for a minute, well, Dark Match isn't exactly serious, but that's okay. It's mixing pro wrestling and horror elements, satanic elements, and human centipede them together and presenting an independent wrestling show that gets the offer of a lifetime. $50,000 to put on a show for some local yokels in a barn with a crowd of maybe 50 people. This is in 1988. I don't think Stu Hart had a show that cost $50,000 or made $50,000, at least in one show. But Stu Hart had a healthy promotion with Stampede Wrestling until basically things beyond his control and Vince McMahon offering him $1 million in increments over 10 years when he paid him $100,000 and then took the talent and said, ha, I'm just going to do that and I have your stars and you have no promotion. Ha ha, pal. So speaking of pro wrestling, we have Chris Jericho in this. Chris Jericho as Prophet, a once proud Canadian wrestler that has been reduced to basically a shell of what he was. But enough about him in AEW. Speaking of which, where was Chris Jericho's wife on January 6, 2021? Nevertheless, let's talk about Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho can't wrestle anymore, can't cut a halfway decent promo, and has basically been living off of his reputation that he built very, very well on the Canadian independents, in Japan, in Mexico, in ECW, in WCW, and even in WWE, and even taking breaks. He was still seen as a big star, and when he went to AEW, he was seen as a big signing. And then within a year, it was really starting to go goddamn downhill, and has since then been going further and further downhill. Thanks, guys. Hi, guys. Okay, I didn't expect much from this trailer, but when I saw that Chris Jericho was involved, I was cautiously pessimistic, because even if you have a halfway decent cast, and the cast in this film does try, and I will say that they don't look down on pro wrestling. It's not a parody of pro wrestling, except when Chris Jericho is talking or on camera, or the fact that Chris Jericho has been a parody of pro wrestling for quite a while. The rest of everybody involved in this at least does their best. You have Aisha Issa, who plays Misbehave. I do admit that actually made me laugh quite a bit. Look, the opening line, 5 deaths in the ring, that is the thing. That is said by Chris Jericho, and I can only imagine how bombed he was saying that and how bombed he was during production. Because, my God, every single bit of dialogue literally sounds like him with his narrator voice for Dark Side of the Ring outside of the last... Outside, like, actually maybe the first season that he did any Dark Side of the Ring narration, he has sounded like he's so goddamn drunk and just out of it and just living off of his reputation that he has torpedoed repeatedly by not understanding that he needs to fucking retire. He's not an actor. He's not a wrestler anymore. He's an embarrassment. Speaking of embarrassment, this movie is a fucking embarrassment, because even after the first independent show that this wrestling promotion SAW puts on, that's an acronym, I'm not going to tell you everything. You got to watch the movie if you want to get every little detail, and there aren't a lot of details in this. Misbehave basically is tired of being, kept down and everything. There is Jonathan Cherry, not to be confused with Don Cherry. No loud suits in this, more in the pity. He is the promoter and ring announcer, and I did kind of like the fact that even though this promotion only put on, shows for like maybe 25 to 50 people, they somehow managed to have a video camera with a fairly decent mic. And, okay, it was like watching, little independent shows. That's not the worst thing in the world. And I appreciate independent wrestling. There are some promotions in my area that I have frequented. Haven't in a couple of years, but I used to frequent quite a bit. And support your local independent wrestling, because it's got to be better than anything put on in this. Look, the horror elements of this should have worked, and making it goofy with goopy violence should be a recipe for at least mild entertainment, but the key word there is entertainment. And once this thing just continues to limp, drag, and, basically shuffle its way along, it's like God shuffling his feet. They take, again, this promotion takes a booking for $50,000 up in, like this remote area. I mean, nobody would just say, hey, wait a second. How would this town have $50,000? Why would they give us $50,000? I don't even think Vince McMahon, was spending $50,000 a show to put on shows in Canada, because Toronto was always hot, and he would run other shows in Montreal and everything. But enough about pro wrestling history, though it's more interesting than what goes on in this movie. I said this is supposed to be a parody of a parody, right? It's like you were watching the evolution of modern wrestling, in 1988. Okay, makes sense why the camera work, was a little bit, or why the camera technology was a little bit goofy. At least that made sense, because I actually didn't know what year it was taking place, and I saw the trailer like once. So, I'm sorry, but just I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, it's not so egregious that I end up hating it as much as I thought I would, but this still might be in the running for worst film of the year, because as it went on, this film, trying to add a serious story, even if it was trying to do it with a wink in its eye, didn't exactly, end up doing anything except nauseating me because I saw so much potential. I don't care about the violence, but I didn't care about any of these characters. I didn't care what happened to them, and there was no depth to any of them. There was no reason to care about any. Aisha Izza does the best she can. Stephen Ogg does a pretty good job as Jolene. Mean Jolene, I have to say I do appreciate the wording there. And there's Kate the Great, Sarah Canning. They're like the two women that work this. It's like Fabulous Moolah booking her women out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Yeah, maybe I can continue to make more dated wrestling references. And basically from there, once they arrive, it's obvious that shit's going south. Shit's totally going south. I'm going to end up spoiling a lot of this, but spoiling this will not haunt you even for 5 goddamn minutes. But basically, once they get there, it's obvious that there's some dark thing going on. And there's some history with Prophet and one of the particular characters. And the problem is it's also edited with garden shears. And Chris Jericho's wrestling ability and acting ability cannot be, amplified by good editing, bad editing, and different editing. It is really not very good. It is really, really fucking bad, in fact. It irritated me the more it went on, because I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have a little fun and we're going to snuff it out right there. There's like maybe 10% of this movie that might be considered fun, but it is a schlog. It is a really big schlog. The camera work also is very off-putting. Like, trying to put you in the ring is one thing, but it also just feels like it's, it's trying to compensate for the fact that it's basically taking place in the goddamn warehouse, which is kind of reminiscent of pandemic wrestling, which is what AEW and WWE did for a little bit. And nothing wrong with that. Everybody mostly survived. But faces and heels traveling in different vehicles, I will say I did like that. That's an old school territory thing. But the lots of 80s, rock for the soundtrack was, I guess, kind of cool. But Chris Jericho fancies himself a rock star. He can't sing. He fancies himself an actor. He can't act. He fancies himself a wrestler. And he used to be. But he's not anymore. The cast tries. The violence is shit. And the implication of a sequel, please don't. Please fucking don't. It's on Shudder if you want to check it out. Spoilers. So, basically, Nick and Joe, Nick is misbehaved, by the way. They're together, and I mean, whatever. Like, there was like a brief bit of commentary once they arrive at this compound that they might end up, or that it might be like, too backwoodsy, seeing an interracial couple, whatever it is, what it is. But Kate and Nick also have an issue because Kate had this, big scout that was supposed to be from the big leagues. There were no big leagues, by the way, in Canada in 1988. The fucking Maritimes are having issues, especially after the death of Adrian Adonis. Vancouver, I don't even think had anything going on at that point. Montreal was totally dead. Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, Emile Dupree, I think, had something going. That might have been the biggest thing going on. And Yeah, that's it. That's fucking it. What, Newfoundland, I think? I think that was that Bearman guy that ran that. That's where Adrian Doss unfortunately died. Um, what is it? Looper? Looper? Calia, I think is what it is. It's just... I, that's like the festival or the show or the name of the cult or possibly the name of the drink that Chris Jericho imbibed and drank a lot to justify the fact that, he needed to be in this to lend no credibility to it. I mean, Chris Jericho has a name, but, plenty of people have names and plenty of people haven't stepped on their goddamn names and covered them in dog shit from the bottom of their boots. Jericho is terrible. Again, fucking terrible. There are like two halfway, or actually pretty attractive cult girls in this like one brief drug-induced sex scene. Everybody gets drugged. We're halfway through, and this is bland. And building up anticipation for the violence is fine. This is 93 minutes with end credits. By the time the credits start rolling, it's 88 minutes. And it barely feels like it has enough material for 40. 5 matches, 5 offerings. There's a win match taking place between two tag teams. One are Bible thumpers, another are like these Satan or these evil guys that were dressed up like Viking versions of the Road Warriors with some spikes on there, and wrestled like the Road Warriors now. There's a fan under the ring. It's a wind match, and one is killed by strangulation or cutting or whatever. Then there's a water match. That's involving the women. And basically the idea is Kate has to win. Kate has to win. And she's going to win. But then Kate has a +1 mace. Thank you, Futurama. But then Misbehave has a chain. Uses a chain. Ends up killing Kate. And Prophet Jericho is upset because Kate was his daughter. This was all a ruse. It turns out that Mean Jolene and the Prophet had something going back to like 79, 82, stuff like that, and he totally went off the goddamn rails on a crazy train, starting to get all satanic because he was over the hill and everything. God, it's almost like Chris Jericho's mirroring his real life. Chris Jericho was a lot better in Terrifier 3 when he got killed. Sorry, the movie's been out for a number of months, and I don't think spoiling that is going to bother you. Yeah, the Prophet basically wants revenge. He wants violence. Joe beat him, and then he went nuts. The league blacklisted him. What league was there in Canada at this point? It's like the NWA in 1988. Bob Geigel running like, a territory that drew like 50 people. So nevertheless, Rusty is basically being drugged to carry on this whole damn thing. There's this pile of earth with some broken glass. He gets some broken glass everywhere, and we can start cutting, and I just don't care. Earth match. There's a character named Enigma Jones that took a vow of silence. He doesn't speak at all. He wears a goofy mask. Doesn't have his jock on the wrong part of his body. It's the Taipei death match, glue, broken glass, and that kind of stuff. But the way they do it is digging into his hands, and him and his opponent are basically going to punch each other. And Chris Jericho actually said, "I defy anyone to call what we do fake. Not tonight." Well, Jericho, I'm not saying that you haven't suffered injuries and bumps and everything, but everything you've done for the last 5 years is fucking fake. And the motherfucker couldn't actually win a goddamn match, without basically just moving around like a goddamn slug, on fucking skis. He would just be sliding all around and doing this and would eventually land in the right spot and then would stumble. And then if he fell over, he'd be like the turtle on that goddamn Futurama episode. And then Bender would have to move over and, fire his ass rocket up to, move the planet away from being burned alive. Can I make more sub-references here? So, the Jericho stuff is just, it's terrible. It's fucking terrible. I don't know why I've gone on so long about it, but maybe because there is potential here. Here for Blood was a better example of utilizing, indie wrestling and having violence. And Here for Blood probably cost, I would say, half of what this movie cost. Maybe a third of what it cost. And that's not a knock. Because Here for Blood did a whole lot more with a lot less than I thought, any movie could. The violence is, just bad. The wrestling by Jericho, he can't wrestle or, do any promos or any lines even in edited form. Prophet is recording all this stuff on VHS, basically to make snuff films to make a profit. Aha, ha 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 ha. An Inferno match. It's Joe versus, I think, this guy named Humble, who has his family held hostage, so he has to win. Well, the problem is there are torches in the corner, and immediately Humble gets set on fire. There's also a fire pit that never gets used. There are a lot of props in this that are set up that never get used. Almost like AEW's programming now. And basically the idea is Joe decides to stay behind, tells Rusty and Nick, take off. They end up at an altar, so to speak, with a bunch of the dead bodies, but they have one more dead body. But, oh no, Enigma's not actually dead because he kept kayfabe. He kayfabed his own death. This movie slaps wrestling in the face more now that I think about it. I mean, it respected it in the beginning, but Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Let's write this snuff film. I mean, they might as well have wrote a snuff film because it couldn't have been any worse than this. A spirit match. It's a cage match where I assume ghosts from the Scooby-Doo cartoons will show up. Enigma shows up and shoots up the equipment, but because he had the glass and everything ripped off of his hands, he's bleeding. He's not doing too well. Jericho can't even, is trying to wrestle here, and my God, it's like watching somebody's drunk uncle as it were, trying to do wrestling moves. There is this broken pitchfork that this one security guard, main guy, got impaled on. And that was thanks to a drop kick from Enigma. No, really, but then he bleeds out, essentially, I guess. And the idea is now Rusty is taken off in the van. He's going to just, leave. And Jericho ends up getting impaled or killed. And then the lady that was like the runner of this whole damn thing, this whole production, takes Jericho's body and sets up this whole damn thing and summons the elements, including spirit. I guess you need that as the fifth element. That's what it was all this time. I thought it was Mila Jovovich just looking hot, like she does now. But yeah, now everybody escapes. Well, Rusty, Joe, and Nick, and then suddenly a green devil shows up. That's what they summoned. They summoned something that looks like it was made in Windows Movie Maker 95, and Misbehave is going to face off with her with a chain, and then they cut the credit. They're really going to do a sequel. You really think you can do a sequel to this? How fucking dare you, Dark Match? How dare you? Shudder, start doing better with the movies that you're going to get. I mean, really? Fucking really? Not everybody bats 1,000, but I love Shudder. I love the archives that they have, but Jesus, some of their originals. Some of them are great. But this is the second one in a row I have seen that is absolutely terrible. There's Grafted, and there's this. Actually, there's The Damned. The Damned, I believe, will end up being on Shudder at some point. It's not very fucking good. So yeah, not a great start for horror so far. So yeah, it gets an F. It gets an F, especially for Chris Jericho just being involved. Because he drags this whole damn thing down. Even if you had a better Canadian actor, I mean, I think Lance Storm in this would have actually been hilarious, but he's busy working for Impact and doing his own thing. So yeah, Chris Jericho hamming it up and making a project that wasn't going to be that good to begin with, somehow worse. Agree, disagree what I said? Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.